Hallo zusammen, mein Name ist Wolfgang Feist, ich bin Gründer und CEO von ValueWorks. Heute freue ich mich, unsere ValueTalks-Reihe eröffnen zu dürfen mit einem Beitrag zum Thema OKR. OKR ist ja in aller Munde als neue Standardmethode des agilen Arbeitens. Jedoch sehen wir in der Praxis sehr viele Herausforderungen, was OKR angeht, das richtig einzusetzen, richtig umzusetzen, richtig zu planen, richtig zu formulieren. Und deshalb freue ich mich sehr, dass wir heute einen profunden Kenner der Materie haben, nämlich unseren Kollegen Lucas Koch von excubate. excubate, einer unserer Kunden und auch Mitgründer von ValueWorks, die über eine jahrelange Erfahrung im Bereich OKR verfügen. Und Lucas wird uns die Lessons learned aus seiner Beratungspraxis, aber auch aus der Beratungspraxis von excubate vermitteln und steht natürlich auch gerne für Rückfragen hier der Community zur Verfügung. Unsere Absicht ist es, die Community damit auch zu starten oder beziehungsweise die Community sukzessive aufzubauen aus Gründern, aus Geschäftsführern von mittelständischen Unternehmen, aus Unternehmen aus dem Tech-Bereich, aber auch aus verschiedenen anderen Digitalbereichen oder auch gerne Leute, die sich für innovative Themen interessieren, insbesondere Themen der modernen datengetriebenen Unternehmensführung und des datengetriebenen Managements. In dem Sinn viel Erfolg, viel Spaß bei der ersten Veranstaltung. Danke.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a senior management consultant at excubate corporate startups, and I'm really happy today to talk in the first Value Talks about the OKR framework. And today I will give you a few insights on recurring challenges in OKR planning formulation, as well as a bit of insights what can go wrong if you don't really make use of the OKR practice or the OKR framework as is intended. And for this, I will just briefly share my screen. Just give me 1 second. Now, we've mentioned objective and key results before, and they are indeed the core of the idea, but still defining the right OKRs is often a bit tricky. And this can, of course, lead to some complications later on. So if every team defines their goals differently, if teams in a company do not use a consistent language or adhere to the rules, many benefits that I described, such as better transparency or a strong focus, cannot be achieved. So let's take a look at how we should define OKRs. So we've mentioned objectives and key results before and what they really are. And of course, they're really the core of the idea, but still we see a lot of companies struggling with defining OKRs the right way. And of course, if you don't define OKRs to cohesive logic using a certain language, and everyone in every team formulates OKR differently, a lot of issues occur. So for instance, transparency is not given, and probably also no focus. And therefore, a lot of the advantages I've talked about before do not exist anymore if you don't use a consistent phrasing or formulation. So let's take a look into this. As mentioned before, we have on the one hand the objectives, and on the other hand the key results. So what do objectives do? Objectives set the focus on change. So with objectives, we don't want to formulate things that we already do, but we really want to focus on things that need to change, that we want to achieve to really make an impact on our business, our team, or project, depending on where we rely the OKR framework to. With objectives, we also need to describe the target state. So really want to have in mind what the outcome is that we want to have to achieve if the objective is fulfilled later on. Another important aspect is that with objectives, we want them to be inspiring and easily to be understood by everyone, especially if you work with OKRs across teams. So it's really important you phrase your objectives in a way that also other teams understand what you're working on. On top of that, and also to facilitate that other teams understand this, is that objectives should be qualitative and not measurable. And one important last aspect here, they should also be achievable with given resources, because nothing is more frustrating than defining goals, in this case objectives, where you know from the beginning that you will not be able to achieve them at all. One example for this could be, if we're looking at a software company, that an objective, maybe we have successfully revised our new warehouse logistic platform. Now, when defining OKRs, it's also important to keep a focus, as said before. So therefore, we also recommend limiting the amount of objectives to 3 to 5 per team or per level. Now, on the other hand, we also have the key results. The key results also have certain criteria that should always be fulfilled. In best case, they describe a result of change as well, and also specify the objectives, quantify the progress, and all of this in a holistic way, so that I know when I have described for, let's say, 2 key results for my objective, if all of my key results are fulfilled, the objective is fulfilled as well. Another important aspect is that key results, as I said before, create transparency through a clear metric, so it shouldn't be ambiguous in any way. Key results are also ambitiously formulated, so-called stretch goals, and they should be independent from each other and no milestones, which is also important to consider, because if I, for instance, define 4 key results for one objective, and the first key result fails, all the other subsequently following key results fail as well, which can also be very demotivating for teams working with OKRs for the first time. One example of how this may look like in practice could be related to the objective. On the left side, we have successfully revised a new warehouse logistic platform. And how do we know we have done this with our key results? In this case, maybe we have increased our active platform users from 700 to 3,000. And again, to keep a focus on that, what really matters, we also always recommend limiting the amount of key results to 2 to 4 per objective. Also looking at the third key result, here we see we have multiple metrics within one key result. We have the 50 potential new employees in there. We have 30 that want to reach the final round, which also makes it really tricky in the end to define, do you have a certain progress here or not? For instance, if out of those 100 potential hirees that made it through or that are interviewed in the first round, 50 made it to the second stage, but none of those in the third one, would that be 50% progress? Or would be 50% progress if 25 out of 50 and 15 out of 30 would make it to the respective stage? Therefore, it's always important to make sure to also have only one key result or only have one metric in one respective key result included. On top of that, the second key result, the 100 potential hirees, are also required in order to get to a certain amount, in this case, 50 potential interviewees or 50 potential employees in the third key result, making it also a mandatory requirement and therefore a milestone, which we do not want. And also looking at the last key result, we realize there's no clear metric. Again, I do not really know when I have fulfilled this key result as a team. And on top of that, we also have a potential overlap with the first key result, because if people really like what they learn on their job, there's also probably a very high likelihood given that they also like their job in the end, which also makes it really tricky to differentiate between the impact of individual key results. Now, how could we make it better? We can make it better, of course, by really focusing on applying the respective criteria on the right side to our key result. And again, let's take a look at an example of how it may look like in practice. We still have the same objective here, but we have now 3 key results instead of 4. And of course, we have different key results than just as seen on the slide before. The first is that our average approval ratings in bi-month and bi-weekly pulse checks improved to at least 90%. So in this case, we have a measure of progress focusing on a value-adding outcome. Focusing on the second key result, we now focused on the last step of the interviewing process. In this case, we do not focus anymore on 100 first stage interviews and 50 second stage interviews, but only on the 20 people hired in the end. Therefore, no milestones anymore. And if you're looking also at the third key result, we merged our previous 4 key results into the first 2. And this opens also a perspective or a chance to widen the perspective, maybe from an only internal looking view on what makes sure that we improved our company perception, to also incorporate an external perspective. For instance, we could also take a look at public websites like Glassdoor or Kununu, and also incorporate a view on increasing the Glassdoor rating, in this case from 3.5 to 4.3, to make sure that our 3 key results we now have really holistically capture the objective. So if we really can check off all our 3 key results, it is guaranteed that we have our objective fulfilled as well. Now, one notion that I would like to make, which is something that we observe a lot of times actually in practice, is that when formulating key results, a lot of teams sometimes do not focus on the difference between output and outcome. And this is something I really want to stress today, because outputs usually describe quantitative deliverables and output items that are necessary to work towards a goal. I'm diving into this in a second, but those respective outputs should use rather for milestones or initiatives outside of the core OKR framework, rather than for the formulation of key results. What we want to focus on with key results are outcomes. So outcomes in that sense describe a measurable outcome or impact that define a successful goal achievement. And as said before, this is what we want in a key result. To make it a bit more clear, hopefully, let's take a look at what is an output and what is an outcome. Outputs ask what we do. So for instance, we could say we publish 10 posts on current company developments, we could develop or roll out 5 new mobile product features, or we could create one marketing concept for mass marketing of a new product. But what we want in the key results are the outcomes. So why are we doing it? And in this case, we don't just want to have 10 posts published because maybe nobody wants to read them. We don't get any attraction or attention on it. And in the end, we may have published 10 posts, but there's no real impact. But what we want to do, or what we may want to do in this case, want to have a growing brand awareness among our target group, in this case, which may have grown from 15 to 25%. Also looking at the second key result, developing and rolling out 5 new mobile product features is something that may be impactful, but if no one really uses it, there's no gain of it. So a better key result, for instance, could be that the mobile product usage has increased from X to Y%, in this case, 40 to 60%. And also looking at the last example, creating a marketing concept for a new product. Again, there might be a product or a product concept for marketing, but if it doesn't work, there's no gain from it. So a better metric here could be that the number of inbound leads for a new product has increased, in this case, from 200 to 2,000. Now, we talked a bit about some recurring issues or current challenges when formulating OKRs in practice, but we all know strategy and goals are nothing without execution. And therefore, I also want to provide a bit of context and also a bit of, hopefully, for you valuable insights about some frequent issues we stumble upon when we help companies implementing OKRs in practice. So some of the recurring challenges and typical mistakes we see is that in many cases, or maybe not in too many cases, but in certain cases, we see clients expecting OKR to solve all issues they have singly alone. So we know that OKR, for instance, is a great tool to drive focus. It's a great tool to increase transparency. It's also a great tool to drive the cultural change. But in the end, OKR is not one single tool that can change your whole company. And therefore, if you want to, for instance, improve your company culture, you also have to provide additional measures to improve on that sense. OKR alone probably will not be able to help you with that. Another issue that we see is that sometimes people get to hear from OKR the first time and think, well, that's a great tool. I really like point 1, point 2, point 3, but they don't really want to incorporate all the aspects that are relevant for the OKR framework to work. For instance, they don't want to really focus on the amount of key results and say, well, we've worked with 20 goals in the past. Now let's formulate them with the OKR methodology, and then we still have 20 key results, limiting the focus. Another aspect is also creating the transparency. So if you say, I want to formulate my OKRs, but also in only a few teams or departments, it also gets very tricky because you cannot create alignment across teams, which is also really great outcome of the OKR framework, that, for instance, marketing knows what sales really wants to achieve, which also helps in their own department's planning. Another issue that we stumble upon is that OKR basically is no rocket science, but in especially companies that are, in a certain sense, a little bit more traditional, it's very tricky to incorporate a framework dealing with maybe a different goal setting, but also different approaches. For instance, a stronger bottom-up approach, as teams also work on developing OKRs on their own. OKRs in that sense are not just formulated top-down, but incorporate a strong bottom-up component. And if you have a team or a company that is not really used to, for instance, quantified goals, bottom-up definition of goals, there is a not to underestimated impact on the company. And it really takes some dedicated resources to deal with, for instance, the cultural chain, but also to make sure that you manage to incorporate a consistent management framework into your team or into your company to prevent some of the issues I talked about before, that every team formulates OKRs differently, that there's no transparency in the end. And if you want to prevent those issues right from the start, there is a certain amount of resources and commitment required to make this framework work. And one last, in this sense, frequent mistake that we've also observed a couple of times is that as a company, you still don't take time to really identify how OKR might suit to you, but rather focus on rolling out the OKR method all at once and then making compromises in quality, leading to, in that sense, broken framework in the end, which does not fulfill or deliver the impact it actually could do. Now, as just discussed, there are probably 4 key errors, and we from excubate, we've seen many companies struggle with those. So there are a lot of issues that you can make during implementation, but of course, there are also countermeasures. And now I really want to provide you some insights about this and some of the success principles for the implementation of the methodology that help you be successful in the OKR implementation in your team or your department. So first is always ensure that your company is OKR ready. You have one single shot to get it right. If you install or implement a new framework and basic requirements are not met, for instance, you don't have a clear strategy, you don't know where you want to go, you don't know what to focus on or where to prioritize, and you don't have the resources or the commitment to actually implement OKR with a dedicated focus, you won't get that far. In the worst case, you have implemented a methodology that will not work, and later on, employees won't like it, employees won't use it, and if anyone wants to help with OKRs later on, people will remember a failed first time. Another success principle, get it right from the start. So of course, OKR is not always easy. On the other hand, OKR is not rocket science, but there are no shortcuts. So use best practice-based implementation of the methodology as a starting point and adhere to the process. Adjustments will come later. For instance, OKR also incorporates agile tools such as retrospective. Make sure to use those to adjust the process, but always start from a best practice approach at the beginning. Also, when starting with OKR, start small, but think big. So keep it simple and fast in the beginning, reduce complexity to what is really necessary, maybe skip complex software at the beginning, and gain experience by starting in small teams and units, but with a clear view towards future scalability. Point number 4, after an initial pilot, improve on the fly, make use of the learnings you make, and move on with continuous process and content reflection. Always talk to the people working with OKR, find out what works, what's not, what doesn't work, and learn from it to make sure to find an OKR structure and framework that works for you. Point number 5, one of my favorites personally, stop starting and start finishing. Focus OKR planning and resources on delivering results, really on what is important. Again, don't try to define everything that you or your team may have to do as an OKR. Focus on what's really important, where you are afraid of maybe losing traction or maybe not making as much progress as you want, really focus on the key areas, focus OKR formulation on those areas instead of trying to capture 100% of the to-dos with it. And also one point, as mentioned before, always embed OKR in the overall corporate transformation. If there are certain leaders that might not be the best one to work with OKRs in the beginning, combine it with relevant agile leadership skills to ensure not only the employees, but also the leadership and the respective team can make the best use of the framework. Mainly what we see is also two different types of tools to support this. The first one is classic task management tools or project management tools that many times have the goals function, which have the purpose that projects work towards the specific goals, but which we can also use to define OKRs for. In that sense, the focus is rather on all the team members to make sure the progress and the initiatives within are executed accordingly. And on the other hand, what we see oftentimes are steering tools with a stronger focus, for instance, of leadership or of management, which provides a better focus on, let's say, dashboards or analytics, and really, in that sense, with a stronger OKR focus and a less focus on initiatives or on project management. But to be honest, what we see in practice many times is, especially with teams that do not have a company-wide task management or in that sense OKR solution, is that they either start on a spreadsheet, so they use Excel for the beginning to scribble down their OKRs, share them with each other, or also something which we saw especially more before the Corona times, that people also use the classic whiteboard to draft their OKRs and keep track of them.